Good afternoon, everyone. And today, as Champion told you, I'm going to give you some insights on Foladinovirus, the disease itself, and some diagnostic options. And of course, we will discuss also a little bit more in-depth BioChek Foladino Elisa. Let me just see. Yeah. So to start, let's just have a quick look to the Foladinovirus and the virus itself. It's a non-enveloped virus, a double-stranded DNA virus. If you look to the right side of the picture, you can see it here. It's an icosahedral particle. And once you get infected, or the flock, the chicken get infected, the virus will replicate in the nucleus host cell. And during this replication, it will develop intranuclear inclusions, like you can see here on the picture on the bottom. And this is quite typical for Foladinovirus. Let me just admit a few people. So looking to the classification of this virus, Foladinoviruses group 1 belong to the family of the Adenoviridae. Champion, I don't know, do I need to admit the people or can you still do this?
We're doing this, Shantina, don't worry.
Oh, okay, perfect. So it belongs to the family of the Adenovirus, and in this family we have 3 genuses. They were previously called Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3 avian adenoviruses. Today the names has changed, and we talk about the first one, Group 1 adenoviruses, are now called today genus the Aviadinovirus. And this is where the Foladinoviruses belong to. In this genus, 5 species are recognized based on molecular criteria. They are called with a letter from A to E. And we have currently also recognized 12 serotypes. We'll discuss a little bit later, but based on the International Committee of Taxonomy of Viruses, those serotypes have been numbered from 1 to 11. In the same family, we also have 2 other genuses. The second one are the group 2 avian adenoviruses, nowadays called genus C adenovirus. To this group, marble spleen disease, splenomegaly, hemorrhagic enteritis virus, and turkeys belong. And then we have group 3 avian adenoviruses, which is today called genus Adenovirus, and to this group, egg drop syndrome belongs. For today, we're only going to focus on the first one, the genus Aviadinoviruses, or the group 1 Foladinoviruses. So as mentioned already, we can further subdivide this genus based on molecular criteria. Nowadays, we have recognized 5 species which are recognized by number, letter A, B, C, D, and E. And based on virus neutralization properties, also this genus has been subdivided into 12 serotypes. In the past, multiple classification systems have been used worldwide. And unfortunately, there was only partial overlap between the different classification systems which were used. Nowadays, it's really recommended to follow the classification system, which is suggested by the International Committee on the Taxonomy of Viruses, and they have given the different serotypes a number between 1 and 11. So here you see a few examples. The classification system which was used in Europe in the past, the USA classification system. There have been others as well. Today, as mentioned before, we give them a number from 1 to 11. There are 12 serotypes, but serotype A is called 8A and 8B. There are three main disease syndromes related to Foladinovirus, and we will discuss them in the next slides a little bit more in depth. But the main disease syndromes recognized nowadays, the first one is adenoviral gizzard erosion syndrome. Second one, hepatitis Heteroparicardium syndrome, and the third one, and we have heard all about it, I think already, is inclusion body hepatitis. Looking at, again to the virus, it's a very resistant virus. It's resistant to pH changes. It can easily cope with pH between 3 and 9. It's also very resistant due to disinfectants, lipid solvents, and it can easily cope with temperatures up to 70 degrees for 30 minutes. So it's very clear that this is a resistant virus, and once it's in, it's very difficult to get rid of it. And that's due to its resistance is also the reason why we currently have a worldwide distribution of Foladinovirus. It's really omnipresent in poultry farms. You can find it on chicken farms, turkey farms, wherever you look. All ages of birds are susceptible, but biggest impact from an economical and clinical point of view is currently seen in young birds. There are a few reports on wild birds, and Foladinovirus is also found in wild birds. And today, Foladinovirus is really considered as a re-emerging disease. And on this slide, I also have shown you, and this is from July 21, I looked into PubMed to the number of Foladinovirus publications since 1963. And I think if you look on this picture, it's very, very clear that over the last 10 years, there's really a huge increase in publications, outbreak report on PubMed. So it's really a re-emerging disease. This is an article or a picture from an article from Anna Schachner from the Hess group from Vienna University. It's from a publication in 2018. And of course, you can see here the world map, but this is actually the outbreaks which were reported with inclusion body hepatitis or Heteroparicardium hepatitis syndrome over the last 2 decades. The pink zones are zones where IBH was reported, inclusion body hepatitis. The arched zones are zones where outbreaks with hepatitis Heteroparicardium syndrome were reported. And if you are pink and arched, then both diseases were reported. And I think if you just look to this map, it's very clear the disease is omnipresent. Looking at a little bit more in depth, also into publications, serological surveys, there have been multiple serological surveys, and antibodies to Foladinovirus have been found in many broiler and breeder flocks worldwide. What makes it more complicated, if we look to isolation, Foladinovirus have been isolated from both healthy as well as clinical birds. And looking to transmission, both horizontal and vertical transmission are described. But vertical transmission is thought to be a really important pathway in the spread and or seeding of forms with several serotypes. What's also important to know about this virus, as mentioned before, we have 12 serotypes recognized, and birds can be infected with more than one serotype. And this comes due to the fact that protection is primarily serotype specific. There is little or no cross protection seen between serotypes. Sometimes we do see, but it's really it varies a lot. And honestly, also within serotypes, you can see varying protection levels. And this is also a picture. This is from cross-neutralization tests, which were done also by the Professor Hess group from Vienna University. It's from a recent publication, I think, yeah, maybe 2020, I don't know anymore, but a very recent publication. And this is about Foladinovirus D group. And he used a number of reference strains and then also their anti-sera. And if you see, there is a very good homologous protection. For any of the viruses, the anti-sera is always offering the highest protection for the own virus. But what you also can see for Foladinovirus serotype 2, it also offers protection to homologous serotypes, although it is not for every strain to the same level. So here you see also a Foladinovirus serotype 2 strain. However, the anti-sera by this Foladinovirus serotype 2 strain only offers limited protection to this serotype. So it's not always that easy with Foladinovirus. Looking to this cross-neutralization test, what you also can see is that there is, to a certain extent, some cross-protection between serotype 3 and 9. If you see here, to this group 3 anti-sera, it also gives a good cross protection for serotype 9. But it is, again, strain dependent. Also between 2 and 11, some cross protection is seen, but again, strain dependent. So, but from this cross-neutralization test, I think it's quite clear that birds can get infected with more than one serotype due to the fact that there is not that much cross-protection. This also means that birds can excrete one Foladinovirus serotype while they are having high levels of neutralizing antibodies to another Foladinovirus serotype. And what's also important to know about Foladinovirus is that latent undetected infections have been demonstrated and may result in subsequent reactivation and vertical transmission. As mentioned, both vertical and horizontal transmission are described, but vertical transmission is considered to be a very important pathway in the spread of the serotypes. When do we see a vertical transmission? This happens when you have breeder flocks which are not seroconverted against the serotypes present in the environment before they go into lay. And what might happen then is once these breeders are on the production farm, then they get their first contact with a certain serotype on the production farm, they get an infection, and you get, of course, vertical transmission. So they get infected during lay, and in most cases, in general, what we see is that they are going to shed virus for a period of 4 to 8 weeks, and that also vertical transmission happens then. Once all breeders seroconvert for this serotype, once they all have neutralizing antibodies for the specific strain, then shedding normally stops and vertical transmission also will stop. Again, in certain cases, keep it in mind, it has been described that reactivation of latent virus might occur when stress happened. And sometimes people also call this the clean house syndrome. And we do see, or there is a tendency nowadays that we do see more and more vertical transmission. And why is this? We focus in all countries worldwide more on biosecurity. We practice state-of-the-art management practices. Biosecurity is one of the key things where we are going to focus on. And then it can happen that breeders go completely naive to the production farms and get infected there, and that's how vertical transmission can occur. So I've just visualized it, the vertical transmission. So here you have a breeder flock. This is the seropositivity. So they are negative in the first, let's say, couple of weeks of life, depending. In an ideal situation, they will seroconvert before going into lay. This can be due to infection. However, nowadays sometimes this doesn't happen due to the high biosecurity levels we have. And honestly, biosecurity is good, but now we need to vaccinate. The only goal we need to have is that the breeders do have neutralizing antibodies against serotypes present in the environment before they go into lay. And this will then protect them on the production farm and will avoid that there is transmission of active virus to the progeny. If you have breeders which go naive into lay, which go from the rearing farm to the production farm without having any antibodies, you have a flock at risk. This flock might get infected on the production farm, and then you have, of course, all issues going together with this transmission of active virus to the progeny, and of course, issues in the progeny as well. Horizontal transmission, also very important today. This can happen due to litter, equipment, personnel. We see on broiler farms, this can really be a recurrent problem. In poorly cleaned and disinfected houses. Honestly, this also happens in houses where it is cleaned very well. What we see is once you have certain strains of Foladinovirus on the broiler farms, it is very, very, very difficult to get rid of it. Sometimes I have seen cases where it's really more complicated to get rid of Foladinovirus than Salmonella. And of course, this then forms a risk for horizontal transmission. If you get broiler flocks, broilers in, day-old chicks with low antibody levels, those broilers will pick up the infection on the farm, the broiler farm, and then you will get a horizontal transmission there. The virus is present in feces, but also in tracheal, nasal mucosa, kidneys. It is really transmitted in all possible excretions, but highest titers are normally found in the feces. The disease has been in many cases related with immunosuppression. However, today it's also recognized as a primary pathogen. In general, incubation time is very short, normally 1 to 2 days. So now a little bit more in depth on the different disease syndromes which are linked to Foladinovirus. The first one is Adenoviral gizzard erosion syndrome. This is really related to species A, Foladinovirus serotype 1. And this syndrome has been experimentally reproduced. So strains have been isolated from the field and then used for infection trials. And Foladinovirus serotype 1 on itself can induce adenoviral gizzard erosion syndrome. If you look on necropsy, what do you see? You will see distended gizzards. You can see hemorrhagic fluid in it. You can see black patchy erosions. Often you also will see some signs of pancreatitis, proventriculitis, hepatitis. Mostly, in most flocks, this goes with low mortality, but what you do see is an uneven growth and of course an increased feed conversion ratio. If we look to differential diagnosis, what you also need to think, of course, about is mycotoxins, biogenic means due to fish meal use. Clostridium can also give similar signs, or nutritional deficiencies like vitamin B6. The second one, which has been described, is hepatitis heteroparicardium syndrome, also worldwide spread. This syndrome is mainly linked to serotype 4 Foladinovirus species C. All types of birds have been reported with this disease, broilers, breeders, laying flocks. It's generally seen in birds of 3 weeks or older. Mortality varies between 20% to 80%. Looking on necropsy, what can you see? An increase of pericardial fluid, really the Heteroparicardium, and of course signs of hepatitis. Again, disease has been associated with immunosuppression, but can also be on itself. And then I think the most well-known disease syndrome linked to Foladinovirus, the third one, is inclusion body hepatitis. This disease syndrome was first described in the 60s in the US. But at that time, it was called the 3 days disease. And why the 3 days disease? In general, what you see is that peak mortality will be reached with this disease syndrome after 3 to 4 days. And then you enter into kind of plateau phase where mortality stays high for another 3 days. And then you see over the next 3 to 4 or 5 days, the mortality will drop again. Overall mortality rates between 10 to 30% has been reported, usually seen in meat-producing birds up to 5 to 7 weeks of age. What you will see, birds are depressed, a little bit weak. You can see signs of jaundice, anorexia, and of course, mortality. On necropsy, what you see with inclusion body hepatitis, typically this enlarged, or typically it's not, but what you will see, enlarged dystrophic friable livers, reddish yellowish color. You can also see, as you can see on the pictures, pale necrotic pancreas. Sometimes muscle hemorrhages are seen, also seen with bursal atrophy. If breeders are affected, or if breeders get an IBH strain infection, sometimes you see a drop or an increase in mortality, a drop in egg production and hatchability, but this is certainly not always the case. In many cases, you know that something happened in the breeders due to issues in the progeny. Looking to inclusion body hepatitis, many serotypes have been associated with this disease syndrome. Main ones currently reported today are serotype 2, 8A, and 8B, and 11. In the past, inclusion body hepatitis was often linked to immunosuppression, IBD, CAV, Gumboro chicken anemia virus, but nowadays it's really considered as a primary pathogen as well. Looking to the control of the disease, what is important still today is that you prevent immunosuppression. In cases of immunosuppression, also today we see certain cases where also Foladinovirus will hit then. Biosecurity, of course, is important. and seroconversion. And once neutralizing antibodies are present against the serotypes or the strains present in the environment, what you will see is that shedding will stop. And in this way, if your flock is seroconverted against or having antibody neutralizing antibody levels against the strains present in this environment, they will not get infected during lay and there will be no vertical transmission. So in ideal situations, you get a seroconversion before your flocks go into lay, and this can be due to natural exposure or vaccines. As far as I know, there has been one live unattenuated vaccine available from serotype 8B coming from Australia. There are multiple commercial inactivated vaccines available, not in Europe, but in other parts of the world. And what we also see is, of course, autogenous vaccines nowadays, where people just isolate the strains present in their region and made regions, farms, and make an autogenous vaccine from it. Looking to diagnostic tools, still today considered as the golden standard is histopathology. And what you are going to do is you're going to look for intranuclear inclusion bodies. And these can be found in liver, pancreas, proventriculus, gizzard. You can find these intranuclear inclusion bodies. Sometimes, but very limited, and only a few labs offer this, is immunohistochemistry, where you also can show the virus in damaged tissue. But there are only a few labs worldwide who offer this technique. What we also see is virus isolation, PCR, and that's very good if you want to detect the presence of the virus. It will also provide you more information. You can from there determine serotype species. However, what is important is on itself, a positive PCR result or a positive virus isolation does not equal disease. There have been many reports described where Foladinovirus have been isolated from healthy flocks. So if you're going to make a diagnosis, it's really plus. You have your diagnostic tools together, of course, with clinical symptoms. And then where I'm in the next slides going a little bit more in depth as well is serology. There are multiple serological methods available. One which has been quite commonly used in the past was agar gel immunodiffusion or agar gel precipitation, which is a group-specific serological method. However, it lacks sensitivity, and therefore nowadays it's less used. What we also see is virus neutralization test, and this is the only serological method which is also serotype specific. So if you use virus neutralization test, it will give you information about the serotypes where the flock is infected with. So this can be interesting. Unfortunately, it's also it's only offered in a limited number of labs, more expert labs. It's time consuming, a little bit more expensive, and as explained, complicated. And then of course, the third method which we have is Elisa. This is also currently a group-specific detection method, so it will show antibodies from all group 1 Foladinoviruses. It's very easy to use, easy to reproduce between labs, within labs. It's not expensive, and with ELISA, of course, you can do mass testing. And I'm going a little bit more in depth on the BioChek kit, which we have the BioChek ELISA kit. It was launched in 2011 and is since then worldwide distributed, but we do have seen over the last years a huge increase in the use of this kit. As mentioned before, it's a group-specific test. So if you use this kit, it will show antibodies against all Foladinovirus group 1 serotypes. I'm not going, these are just some details. I'm not going to discuss it further. Looking to specificity, it's a very specific kit. First of all, we've looked into SPF samples and some commercial negative, although difficult to find. This are the results from an SPF log where we analyzed 102 serum samples. And as you can see here, we had in this specific trial 100% specificity, but what's more important is all these samples are clearly below the kit cutoff. Yeah. Looking on other methods, and we looked into sensitivity, we also compared it with agar gel immunodiffusion and with histopathology. These were several broiler flocks where, let me say, a Foladinovirus infection was suspected. So at slot rate, samples were taken, serum samples from for agar gel immunodiffusion and for the BioChek ELISA, and also sample tissue for histopathology. And as you can see, here were 3 flocks which were positive on histopathology, where intranuclear inclusion bodies were found. However, if you look to the agar gel immunodiffusion results, this flock was still the 10 samples all tested negative on agar gel immunodiffusion. Looking to those two flocks, only a very limited number of sera tested positive. If you look to the BioChek ELISA results, those 3 flocks were clearly positive on BioChek ELISA. The other ones, here you had 3 which are represented by the green colored 3, which were negative on all tests. There was 1 flock which was slightly above are cut off, but what we in general see is, as mentioned, you can have healthy flocks with Foladinovirus, that there was some contact, and therefore this flock was slightly positive on our test. Looking where this kit is used, then we see, of course, a big majority of kits which are used in breeders and which are used really to monitor if breeders get a positive status before they enter into production. Most of our customers will monitor their breeders if it's really for between 12 and 18 weeks. And in general, what you want to obtain is that certainly both after natural conversion and vaccination, more than 90% of the breeders is positive, ideally 100%, honestly, and a CV below 35%. What we see just before production and in production, normally what you expect is that they have high positive mean flock titers, ideally above 10,000. It's a baseline. This is not black and white. It's important that you do set it for your own region, but that's based on our experience, what we do see. I have a few customers in Europe, which say 9,000 is sufficient, can be, in general, we say above 10,000. What we do see is, if you count on natural seroconversion, that we do see quite often poor seroconversion. Yeah. And this might be cases where you can say, if you have the option to vaccinate, where you are going to monitor your flocks the first time, let's say around 5-6 weeks. And if you see only poor levels, it might be, if you do not overall in general practice vaccination, then it might be very wise to vaccinate these flock before going into lay. Again, interpretation can certainly be very challenging. Why? With ELISA, it's a group-specific test, so you don't know against which serotypes antibodies are found. And as mentioned, birds can get infected with one serotype without while having antibodies against another one. So this might make it challenging to do interpretation. An example of a good natural seroconversion, and I'm just thinking, I think these are results from Latin America, if I remember well. But here you see a broiler breeder flock at 5 weeks. This is from the same company, not the same flock. Where you already see at 5 weeks that they do show nice titers already. CV is also going already quite low. And here you can expect that this flock normally will get a nice natural seroconversion before going into lay. This is from the same company, an example of a broiler breeder flock at 15 weeks already. And this is really a very nice seroconversion, high titer, 15,000 and a low CV. And that's what you want to obtain, that they do have high levels of antibodies against the serotypes present in the environment. This is another example of poor seroconversion. I think this is from Spain, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, this is a broiler breeder flock at 10 weeks. And what you see is really low levels. If this would be my flock, I would certainly go for vaccination here. I wouldn't count on natural seroconversion. This is a broiler breeder flock, same company, 29 weeks. Also here, what you see is still a very high CV. Although you have a mean flock titer of 9,000, you still see here on this limited number, there were 10 samples or 8 samples even, one bird with low levels of antibodies protection, and this might be of risk, of course. Other examples between poor seroconversion and a good seroconversion, as mentioned, what do you want? In general, both after vaccination or natural infection, what you want is before birds go into lay, at least a mean flock titer above 10,000, in my opinion, and a CV below 35. And ideally, 100% of the birds are positive. Here you see there is a lot of variation in the flock and the levels of antibodies, which also means that you have birds with only low levels of protection and birds where you have high levels of protection, high levels of antibodies. And this is an example of poor seroconversion where you still will have birds in the flocks which might be at risk for still spreading or transmitting virus. I'm now going to take you through a case of adenoviral gizzard erosion syndrome, which was published in 2012. It was a case report from Germany where they suddenly saw 22 broiler flocks with outbreaks of adenoviral gizzard erosion syndrome. And once they started looking a little bit more in depth, it became clear that those 22 broiler flocks all originated from the same broiler breeder flock. Who produced the affected broilers between 27 and 30 weeks of age. So looking to the serology of this broiler breeder flock and the different houses. So what they did was, they mixed the samples, so I do not have on 25 weeks a separate result for house 1 and 2. But what you clearly see is at 25 weeks, house 1 and 2 were still clearly negative. House 3, there were very low levels of antibodies for Foladinovirus. But on the 29-week samples, you clearly see the increase in titers. So it was very clear that this flock had a weak seroconversion or went completely naive into lay with having no or very limited levels of antibodies against Foladinovirus. They got infected on the production farm, and it resulted in vertical transmission of Foladinovirus, and you had 22 affected broiler farms with signs of adenoviral gizzard erosion syndrome. Again, we see nowadays more and more also tendency to vaccination, and also there the BioChek Elisa kit is a very nice tool to monitor the success of your vaccination. And just an overview from a customer who does vaccinate and shared some of his results with us. This is a broiler breeder flock which was vaccinated at 8 weeks. The yellow line represents the CVs. Here you see the maternal antibodies levels, which will disappear over time. So at 4 weeks, you have a negative titer. And at 8 weeks, this customer applies vaccination, and then you see that the titer will increase again and CV will lower. And this is what you want to obtain. So you want to have titers above at least 10,000 ideally, and a CV below 35%. This is also from a customer who does vaccination as several broiler breeder flocks 4 weeks after vaccination, where you see the yellow dots represent the CV, very low CVs and high levels of antibodies. So this is on the broiler breeder side. Also on the broiler side, the BioChek Elisa kit is commonly used. What is done is sometimes it's used to look to day-old chicks levels of maternal antibodies. And this is mainly done on farms where they have recurrent problems with an infection on the broiler farm. And then they start looking into the day-old chicks to be sure that they have or receive day-old chicks with high levels of maternal antibodies so that they don't have any issues with horizontal transmissions on the broiler farms. In general, if you have birds with, of course, broiler chicks with day-old chicks with negative titers or group 0 titers, these are considered negative and can be easily infected in a very early age. Really at day 1, day 2, they already have chance to get infected. Again, same thing here. Positive ELISA titers do not necessarily correlate with protection. It's really important that you do have a good indication or a good impression of what's happening in your region on your farms, which strains are present, and that you make sure if they get maternal antibodies that it is against the strains present in the region on the farms. These are some examples from maternal antibodies in day-old chicks. These are results from Turkey, recent results. Here you see an example, and again, maybe important also to stress, ELISA results or day-old chick results independent of the results you see, it doesn't say anything about the presence of the virus itself. You can't say anything about it with ELISA results. But what you see here is day-old chicks with only low levels of maternal antibodies. You still have more than half of the samples tested, which are completely negative. You know, if you bring these birds to a farm, a broiler farm, where they have round after round Foladinovirus issues, that it will happen again. So these are day-old chicks with low levels of maternal antibodies, low protection. The second one here, the picture here is from another batch of day-old chicks. Here you do see a high mean titer in the day-old chicks, as with quite some variation, but overall you see some of the birds have really high levels, other medium high levels. This certainly shows this batch of day-old chicks will have better protection. Again, you can't say anything about it. This can be due to that these birds originate from a flock which is currently infected or which was infected already a long time. You can't say just based on the titers. Where we also use, or where customers currently also use our kitten broilers, is to look at serology at slaughter age. And as mentioned before, what we know nowadays is that the Foladinovirus is present on many, many, many farms. This also means that there is a reasonable chance that your broilers will get in contact with Foladinovirus on the farms. But most healthy broiler flocks, what we nowadays have seen, will test low positive at slaughter age. And what do I mean? What our experiences are, the one of our customers, is that currently healthy broiler flocks normally have titers, mean titers below 3,000 at slaughter age. If we look to clinical flocks, they have mean flock titers above 6,000 in general at 35 days or later. Again, it's not a black-white story. Serology only meaningful when you compare the results between healthy and non-clinical birds with clinical birds. And again, it's really the exercise of clinical science together with serology, and in some cases also with histopathology. Again, there are baselines. These are just guidelines based on our experience, and it is important if you're starting using our kit that you do set your own baselines for your regions. Here I also share some results of customers. These are broiler flocks for different broiler flocks. None of them had issues or were all non-clinical and performed well. This is one outlier, I would say. This flock had a mean flock titer above 3,000, but according to the customer, no issues were seen in that flock and was negative on histopathology. So were considered as non-clinical flocks. This was a clinical flock, and you clearly see the difference. You have here a mean flock titer of 11,000, and that's in general what we see. I'm also going to take you through a case from Spain, a broiler case about inclusion body hepatitis. First symptoms in this broilers were seen at 13 to 16 days of age. They were depressed, sitting in crouching position. They were lethargic. Mortality was seen. Peak mortality was reached 3 to 5 days after the first symptoms and disappeared 6 to 7 days later. Overall, a total mortality at slaughter was seen between 8 to 30%, depending on the house. And on necropsy, what was seen were of course, enlarged dystrophic livers with a yellowish color, crumbly texture, also signs of nephritis. Histopathology was done and intracellular inclusion bodies were found both in the liver and kidney tissues. Here you see some pictures of this specific case from the necropsy. Looking to the serology results, and this was from the Foladinovirus case, the IBH case, serotype 8 was isolated, but what you see on this broiler flock at slaughter age 38 days, a high mean flock titer of 14,000, low CV due to the infection. In the non-clinical flock, what you see, this was at 46 days, a low median mean flock titer of below 2,000 just. This is again just visualized between the non-clinical flock and the clinically affected flock. And the clinically affected flock, what we also did at the moment symptoms started, serum samples were collected, and here you see really the results between the serums collected at the start of the symptoms and at slaughter age, which also gives you really the confirmation that you had a Foladinovirus outbreak, but you go from very low titers into very high Foladinovirus titers at slaughter age, and you clearly see the CV dropping, very indicative for an infection. So this is currently the experience from our customers, which I shared or wanted to share with you today. As mentioned, you need to build some experience with using the BioChek kit, but once you start using it, it will give you a lot of valuable information. However, in certain cases, it will still be challenging. Why? Again, due to the fact that you have that many serotypes, and that's protection is mainly serotype specific, and that even within serotypes, also sometimes within a serotype, and sometimes you can even then see low levels of cross protection. So this, of course, makes it very challenging. On the other hand, if you really monitor well, and if you look and clearly bring into picture which strains, serotypes you have present in your environment, and make sure your birds get seroconverted against the breeder birds, against these serotypes, and produce broilers with high levels of maternal antibodies, then you will have limited or no issues with Foladino. Again, to summarize Foladinovirus worldwide distribution, there are a wide range of manifestations seen from mild to very severe forms of clinical disease in poultry. Diagnosis is obtained by a combination of clinical history, serology, molecular techniques. Elisa is certainly a useful tool. And prevention, of course, starts by seroconversion of the parent flocks prior to lay, and then seroconversion against the serotypes and the strains present in the environment. What we still see, or what's published also, is if you have another immunosuppressive disease present, of course, Foladinovirus can be aggravated. SPF flocks, of course, monitoring to confirm negative status. In breeders, it can be used to monitor natural seroconversion or to do vaccination monitoring. worst case scenario to do disease monitoring in breeders. Just to mention it, this may be also nice, but from the experience we have seen, but again, if you do wonder if something happens, sometimes, as mentioned before, you can have breeders which have seroconverted and go into lay, and suddenly they get an infection on the production farm with another serotype. Then, of course, you still can have or will risk vertical transmission. In general, if this happens, if you have a subsequent infection with another serotype, we do tend to see an increase in the antibody titers on the Foladinovirus kit. However, this is certainly a challenging situation. And in such situations, it might be very useful to also include virus neutralization tests, because if you then take paired samples, you can clearly see if this breeder flock gets or got infected with another serotype. It's not always black white, but with ELISA, it will certainly give you valuable information. In broilers, what you can do, of course, they'll check monitoring to look to the maternal antibody transfer, and then disease monitoring from 35 days of age to slaughter age. And this is just to look to horizontal transmission, and also vertical transmission, but to confirm your diagnosis, and then you compare clinical versus non-clinical serology. So this is it. I don't know if there are any questions.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Adina. So it's a really great presentation. So we know lots of the details and how to do the interpretation by the proper ways and give it some kind of the guidelines. And indeed, there's a lot of the questions from our participants. So I think we just do some minor categories. So I think we can start with the specification of the kits. So they want to explore more about the details about the kit. So I think the first one is they asking, is it this kit is specific to only for adenovirus, or is any risk you might get some cross reaction with the ADRA symptom virus?
With
ADRA symptoms, EDS.
No. So it's really specific for Foladinovirus serotypes. We have tested EDS serotypes, and so far there is really no cross reaction from EDS on the Foladinovirus kit. So it's really for the detection of Foladinovirus group 1 antibodies. We have results of this from sera we tested, and we certainly can share those results. We have tested in the past monospecific EDS sera, and they come completely negative on our ELISA, Foladinovirus ELISA. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And the second is so I think they want to know how about what's the group specific. So which group what kind of the antigens we use on the plate?
So no, we use there's one antigen on the plate. We code with one antigen. From what we have seen, and we've tested it, this antigen on the plate will detect antibodies from all different serotypes. Yeah. But I agree, certain strains will result in higher level of antibodies than others. But overall, and also there we have results from sera from reference strains, where we do show that all reference strains as serotypes are detected, or antibodies from all serotypes are detected by this one antigen on the plate.
Okay, yeah. And the third one is, okay, so could you tell us if the kit could distinguish between one serotype from another one serotype?
No, so again, it's a group specific kit. We can't say, based on the results, you can't say which serotype it is. There is no possibility, but what we do see sometimes, and I'm not going to claim this is always the case, but if birds get infected in a later stage with another serotype, and there has been a publication, then you can see increase also on the ELISA side, but you can't make any conclusion about which serotype or from which serotypes the antibodies originate with our ELISA. So if you want to look with serology into serotype specific results, you need to go to the virus neutralization test.
Okay, yeah. And the next one is, okay, so they're asking, so if we do the virus neutralization testings for the serospecific to checking with the vaccine's response. So the ELISA, how could we combine together with the virus neutralizations as the bigger tools to do evaluation with the vaccines?
So again, virus neutralization tests is only, my experience is only available in a limited number of labs. Yeah. When is it used? In cases where you suspect there might be something going on, and where you have already, where ELISA can't answer your what you want to check. So let's imagine you see from a certain breeder flock broilers with issues, and you might suspect the breeder flock has been infected with another serotype during its production. Then that's a real nice case where you could use virus neutralization test, and where you say, I'm going to really, but actually you're going to do cross neutralization, where you are going to take a few sera, you test them for all different serotypes, you take paired sera, and you look at let's say you have a suspicion of a flock which between 25 and 29 weeks, you take your 25-week samples, 29, and then you're going to look if you see if there is a certain serotype where you suddenly see antibodies on the virus neutralization test appearing. Yeah, this is where you use it. Again, it's quite expensive. In most cases, what you do, because often you don't know which serotype it is you're going to do the whole bunch, so 12 serotypes. It's quite expensive. So, and again, only available in a limited number of labs. Is it useful information? Absolutely. Would I advise to do it? Yeah, in certain cases, I really would advise you to do it, just that you have a clear idea of what is going on. Yeah, and this is certainly advisable also if you then want to look if you are vaccinating and you suddenly have this issue. This gives you very good information to further optimize your autogenous vaccines or your vaccination strain. If you suddenly see a new strain, a new serotype is appearing on your farms, and you see this in the seroneutralization tests, and this gives you a clear indication to further optimize your vaccination strategy for Foladinovirus.
Yeah, thank you. And now we go for the details. So there's a question they're asking for the ELISA titers. So we provide a baseline. So you mentioned if it would be higher, more than 10,000.
Yeah.
So this kind of the baseline, it's would be compatible for all the serotype, or it might be a little bit
so that's so that's what I said. At our baselines, this is the experience we've seen. I can share from one of our customers in Germany. I know his baselines. He wants to have baselines. He's happy if he has titers above 9,000 before going into lay after vaccination. So it's really indeed depending also on the strains present in the environment, how high you would like to have your titers. So what I provided is our guidelines. And honestly, based on natural seroconversion, and I have seen over the last year quite a lot of results, I think in most regions, I still see due to natural seroconversion titers above 10,000, and that are flux where no problems then later on are reported. If I see titers below 10,000, these are flux where I sometimes doubt, and where sometimes, but of course, it's not always conclusive, but clinical issues are reported in the progeny, but no final diagnosis is made. Yeah, it's difficult. My advice is, what I give it you is a guideline. At the end, you need to make your own baselines for your own situation. Yeah, and that's really, yeah, what you need to do, because I can't follow adenovirus. Depending on the region, other serotypes are seen, other strains are seen, and it's very difficult to give 100% sure advice.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is, how can we check if there's a vertical transmissions by ELISA? Is it possible?
No, no. ELISA is not going to give you any indication of vertical transmission. You can have, yeah, ELISA never is going to give you any indication about vertical transmission. It's honestly very hard to prove, but actually you should isolate then from your broiler breeder flock and broilers the same strain to be 100%, or to have a good indication, let me say it that way, that it is vertical transmission, but it's not possible to prove it with ELISA.
Okay. So, and the next one is, they're asking about the monitoring program. So they're asking, when's the best time to do the monitoring to check with the seroconversion?
Yeah, in Asia, according to my information, you do have access to vaccines. So what I would do is monitor my breeder flocks, if it would be my flocks, on an early age, let's say around 6 weeks. Yeah. If you only see poor levels of antibodies or no level of antibodies between 6 and 10 weeks, then I would prefer to personally to vaccinate these flocks. If you count on natural seroconversion, you always take a risk. There is no way you can be sure that it will be that there will be a good natural seroconversion. Of course, if you have between 6 and 10 weeks already high level of antibodies, then you are almost sure that it will be protected by natural seroconversion against the strains present in the environment. But if you see between 6 and 10 weeks only low levels, then I would go for vaccination if you have access to it. Yeah, and then to be sure the flock is well vaccinated, I would monitor once more on 18 weeks, let's say.
Okay, thank you. Then I think the later one is, I think that it's a kind of the further question followed by the ELISA testing with the vertical transmissions. So they're asking, how about the PCR? Is it possible to confirm with the vertical transmissions?
Yeah, if you can show it, let's say, into your day-old chicks, or then I would say this is proof of vertical transmission. Yeah, if you immediately kill a few day-old chicks upon arrival, and you take tissue for PCR tissue samples, and you isolate it, then that's proof of vertical transmission.
Okay, yeah, so I think it's quite clear for us. Okay, then I think, okay, so based on the detail of the kids, it's almost to be answers. Then now we go for, will be in terms with how to practical side, how to do the proper interpretations, how to use this kit in the practical way. So I think the first question is been, okay, so they're asking, do you have any experience with FAdV serotype 1s infected and caused with the Giza erosions in the layer at the laying stage? So how about anti-resistance about the serotype 1?
About age resistance?
Yeah, because
Or,
in the previous
yeah.
slide, yeah.
Yeah, I only have, let me say, myself limited reports on age, disease, but looking into literature, I must say cases has been described in, let me tell, older flocks as well, yeah. In general, and the reports I shared with you, and this is of course in a broiler flock then, broiler and broiler breeder, but also the other reports I've seen of age are mainly in younger birds, yeah, which I say during rearing or, yeah, in the layers then. But I know, as far as I can remember, there have been a few publications also of age in layer flocks in production. Yeah. With
Okay.
symptoms in the layers as well. But honestly, and this is maybe, yeah, good to know, I think, and this is something where we do not focus on. Maybe there is only limited cases described, but my experience is, so far, and certainly about layers, I must say, if I look to where the kids go, the majority goes into currently broiler breeders. In layers, that I'm really talking about not layer breeders, but just layers. Until today, my experience is that there is limited monitoring done there on the Foladinovirus side.
Okay, thank you. Then, okay, so, and the next question, so if the flock has been vaccinated, then following by the infections, so how will happen with the antibodies titer patterns?
Yeah, so let me tell. It's not 100% predictable. So if you vaccinate and let's say you include a certain serotype or a certain strain, and then they get, let's say, still the strain is present on the farm, what you can see is a boostering effect in certain cases, yeah. But this is really like you vaccinate or you would vaccinate twice, yeah. If you get another strain, it's really dependent on the strains and the serotypes, and there is no real prediction I can make about it. In a lot of cases, we do see an increase in titer without often seeing issues in the flocks or in the progeny. But again, as you have seen in the slide from the publication of Hess, of the group of Hess, Professor Hess, even within serotypes, sometimes, although you vaccinate with serotype 2, there can be strains where there is no or limited cross protection, or the other way around. What you will see then is certainly increase in titer, but you also can see then, of course, issues in the flock or the progeny.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, so the next one will be very practical. So it's a commercial boiler. If they use the vaccines, it would be helpful to protect with the boiler.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, so they're asking if they use the vaccine with the commercial boilers. So this will be helpful for the boilers because it means how long they will have a seroconvergence.
Yeah. So they vaccinate the broilers.
Yes.
That's the, yeah. So first of all, if you vaccinate the broilers, I know this is done in some regions. I think it's with killed vaccine, correctly, Champion?
Yeah,
Do you
yes,
know
the
it?
vaccine,
Killed
yes.
vaccine, yeah. So what the risk always is, if you vaccinate broilers, and you would do this because of low levels of maternal antibodies, of course, and of issues on the farm. As mentioned before, Foladinovirus is a very resistant virus, very difficult to get rid of it. If you get broilers in with low levels of maternal antibodies or no maternal antibodies, as shared with you, these broilers are at risk from day one. Yeah, they can pick the virus up on the broiler from at day 1 of age, day 2 of age. They even can pick it up if there is no good biosecurity on the hatchery, at the hatchery, to be completely open about it. So if you're going to vaccinate broilers, it might be already too late, because it takes time before your broilers are going to develop antibodies. And if you are on a farm with recurrent problems where the strains are present in a certain level on the farm, you might come too late already.
Okay.
I'm not, but again, this is my experience. I'm not 100% convinced about vaccinating broilers with, in this case.
Okay.
I think you better can make sure that you do have broilers with high levels of maternal antibodies against the strains which are causing problems on your broiler farm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And the next one is, have you observed any relations between other virus co-infections? So for example.
Yeah. This has been described, and there are publications of it, and I can share it certainly, but in general, Foladinovirus can be aggravated with, of course, other infections. So this has been described, and I know this is the case, but again, nowadays it's also proven that Foladinovirus on itself can also cause disease. But I know if you have concurrent infections, and I'm thinking about immunosuppressive diseases, but also in certain cases, I thought there was a publication with IB where they did infection trials. You can see in the mixed infections that often symptoms are aggravated when there are more, of course, more diseases present.
Yeah, okay. Then I think they are looking into the details. So how about the relations between with intermediate plus IVD vaccines, because it's quite strong, it might affect with the immunities when they give the vaccines?
I can't say. I have no data, and I don't know if there is a publication looked into it. I can't even answer that one.
Okay.
No, I can't answer it. No.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's almost will be included, and I say, okay, there's a details about the kit. So they want to know, could you please tell us how much the limitation of the antibody levels we can detect on the many serotypes of the FAdV?
Yeah, so, and there is a publication about this with the BioChek ELISA kit. Again, we detect group-specific antibodies. If you get a subsequent infection, and there is a very nice publication from Iran about it, and I will share it with the Asian team. So if you want to have it, you can ask them, where you have the BioChek ELISA, and they also compared it with virus neutralization test in several flocks. I think they included 4 flocks. And where you can see the tendencies. It's really difficult or hard to say what is going to happen for sure. There are flocks described where you get another strain in, and where you then see also clear response on the BioChek ELISA as well, together with the virus neutralization test. There are other flocks where you see, for one or another reason, both virus neutralization tests, although you see there comes another strain in, for some reason, it only gives very low virus neutralization titers, which even disappear over time, and where you don't see anything happening in the ELISA. Is this because there is cross protection? Again, Foladinovirus is a very complicated disease, many serotypes where there is only limited cross protection or no cross protection. Even within a serotype, we also know there are different levels of protection. It's very hard to predict for sure what's going to happen. But what we know is, let's say you only have one strain present, independent strain it is, you would need to get a reaction on the BioChek ELISA.
Okay, thank you. And now the next questions will be want to know about how about your experience. So they want to know, as the disease transmissions, so how about the possibility, the horizontal transmission from farm to farms, and how high the viral loads could happen to create horizontal transmissions?
Yeah. Again, there are. I'm going to say my experience. I have seen farms where naive broilers go in and where they get, let's say, contact with a strain. Foladinovirus disease is really the combination of, you have strain differences within a certain serotype. Some strains do cause issues, others don't. Yeah. So this is already difficult to say what is the level where you expect issues. There is more than just the pressure. It's also the strain, probably other factors which also play into a role. But what you see is even within a certain serotype, it's not because you have a strain serotype and completely naive broilers getting in that you for sure get issues. The same thing, but it can be that you have another strain, serotype 2 strain on a broiler farm, and although only low levels, where you get serious issues. It's a multi-factors play a role in it. I can't predict what the level is. But what I do know, if you would have enough maternal antibodies to protect your broilers during the first weeks of life, my experience is in those cases, you only in a very limited number, you will still see issues. So what I would say is make sure your broilers have high levels of maternal antibodies against the strains you see on the broiler farms, and there will be no risk there. But I can't say anything about the load or the level which cause issues. It's really depending on many factors.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a following question. So do you have any recommendations, methods, or the agent for the disinfections to prevent the disease entry to the farms?
Yeah. Unfortunately, with Foladinovirus, it is very challenging. Yeah. Can you protect your birds 100% for sure? No. Yeah, but you can do it in the best possible way. If you have, and that's really something you need to investigate, if you have outbreaks, please do look into which strain, which serotype. Yeah. Make sure if it's a new strain or a new serotype that you do vaccinate your breeder flocks with that serotype, so that you get for the next batches of broilers then broilers which have maternal antibodies for that strain or serotype. Is this 100% safe? No, because as mentioned, cross protection is limited. If tomorrow another strain gets in, you still have the risk there. But again, what is important, clearly visualize what you have in the region or in your company. If you're an integration, bring into MAP which outbreaks, which serotypes, strains are involved, and then make an autogenous vaccine or try to find a commercial vaccine which cover your serotypes, and make sure they are vaccinated well and will have that there will be enough transfer of antibodies to the progeny.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So
and update if you have an outbreak, always check what happened, which strain is it, and investigate why you get an outbreak, and update your vaccines based on the outbreak.
yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. So there's one more question. So they want to ask about how high the titers could be get from our kit. So normally they might have a 30,000 or even higher, around 50,000 from the kit.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say there are a few factors playing a role in it, but in general, you can measure easily titers up to 25,000, 40, 35,000. Let's say even some labs I've seen titers up to 40,000, but easily up to 35,000.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think the questions already almost be answered, and some just similar questions, so you already answered in the previous questions. So really appreciate your today's presentations and your Q&A sections.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think today's webinar will be ready to close. So thank you for all your participating.
Yeah.
And look forward to
yeah, if there would be any questions still, feel free to reach out also by email. If you have reports where you would like to have a second opinion, feel free to send it. And I can assure you, just to make sure, but we will never share any details of the report with other customers. So please, if you have questions or want to discuss some results, feel free to approach us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and if you want to have any requests about the related documents, or you have any interesting about our kit, please feel free to contact with our HR teams. We are happy and glad to share the further information with you. So thank you very much for your participating, and looking forward to see you in the next series of the TED Talk. Goodbye.